Hi, welcome to night one of the cram sessions for AP Literature. I'm Jasper Covington, and I'm here with Arnica. Later, we're going to be joined by our other presenter, Rashi. But let's kick it off. Poetry night. Who's ready? Okay, so this is poetry analysis, and we have some community agreements. Before we get into it, we want to remind you guys to be supportive, patient, and kind, and we will be as well. We're here to lift each other up and ensure that everybody's feeling okay and confident in their performance for this exam that's coming up. Everybody might be at a different spot, whether they're feeling totally ready for it or not as ready, and we just want to kind of be empathetic towards everyone and where they're standing. And of course, be patient. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the main chat, and our lovely hosts will answer them whenever there's a moment to, but your questions will be answered eventually. And we're here to help you. And remember that, we will be helping you. And be kind. We're real people taking our time to be here tonight, as are you. You're taking initiative by being here. So definitely keep these things in mind. And if you want to access the slides, cheat sheets, or other cram resources, you can click this green button right below the slides. And here are all of us, and here is the schedule for the rest of the cram sessions. Of course, this is night one, poetry analysis. You can stay tuned for prose, literary argument, MCQ, and then our big finale day on the 7th. And here is how to make the most of your time here. While our sessions are recorded and there are resources that are more asynchronous for you, there's definitely tips that we have so you can get through these sessions and make them the most beneficial to you. Take notes, like using mnemonics and questions and whatever note method works best for you. But definitely don't write everything down. You'll just be scratching it down the whole time, I promise. They are recorded. There are slides available to you. You don't have to worry about getting everything down. And like I just said, in the Cram Hub, you will have those slides in the review packet and all of that stuff. Definitely use the chat whenever you feel need be, or just to put that good fiveable energy in there, and use the Q&A tab whenever you have a question. We'll be taking breaks. Don't worry. I know 3 hours seems like a long time, but you got this. And we will be taking accommodations for your needs. So the agenda today, we'll be looking at the building blocks of poetry, poetic devices, then we'll be having our first break, looking at more advanced poetic techniques, an intro to poem analysis, another break, and analyzing the poet's craftsmanship, review, and questions. And we will be having quizzes intertwined with this just to kind of see where you're at and help you feel good about this exam. And of course, you can follow Fiveable on social media, a little shameless plug for you, just so you can know what's going on and be up to date. So kicking off with the building blocks of poetry, these are the first things you want to look at when analyzing a poem. No, you're good. Next slide. So first, we're looking at character. And character can be analyzed by perspectives, actions, and interactions. If you remember, or were here for the preview night, you remember me talking about Timmy slapping someone on in the face and being able to tell his character by those kinds of actions. And while poetry might not always be that blunt, that's the kind of thing that you're looking at when you're analyzing characters specifically, is how they interact with the world and people around them. Structure is how poems are formed. And this is paying attention to lines and stanza breaks, if it's a sonnet, if it's free verse, ballads. How a poem is composed is intentional, whether it's free verse or whether it's more structured. And this builds up the poem itself, and through that you can analyze it based on how it's built. And open versus closed forms. So these are two vocabulary words to distinguish having a specific structure for a poem and having a free verse poem. A free verse poem is open form, and a closed form follows a specific structure, whether that be a sonnet, a free verse, a ballad, etc. It's just a poem that follows a specific structure that isn't free verse. And lastly, diction and connotation. So, diction is often and always associated with tone. When you think of diction, you should think of tone. And this is personally what I look to first when analyzing a poem is what words the poet chooses. This is used to convey the tone, mood, and theme. So, when a poet is choosing specific words, they are using that to go with the theme and the tone of the poem. Okay, so sonnets are a specific example of a closed form that have 14 lines, follow iambic pentameter. All my Shakespeare nerds know what I mean by that, and follow a specific rhyme scheme. And as I said, it's often featured in Italian, oh, I can't say that word, Petrarch sonnets and Shakespearean sonnets. One moment, sorry. And free verse doesn't follow a specific rhyme scheme or meter and allows poets to express themselves more freely. And with this note, I will pass it over to Rashi, who will explain the rest of poetic structure to you.
Hi everyone, super sorry for the interruption, but I love poetry so much I can't help but join in. So the third type of poetic structure is a ballad. And a ballad tells a story, it has strong narrative elements, and they often have simple language and a regular rhyme scheme. So in the chat, if you guys want to drop some examples of sonnets, free verse, and ballads, we'll take a minute. Just so you guys can brainstorm and think of some common ones that you've heard. Some very common sonnets you might have heard would be like William Shakespeare. He loved his sonnets. And there's actually a quote that I find really funny. Someone wrote it about William Shakespeare, where it was like, if a man writes a sonnet, that means he loves you. But if he writes 300 sonnets for you, that means he loves 300 sonnets. So just a fun little thing to think about. Free verse, if you guys were here for our cram preview on, I'm blanking on the date, but it was night 2. We talked about some free verse poems. One of them was Siren. I believe it was from Margaret Atwood, where there was a lot of enjambment. There was no particular sense of rhyme scheme or meter, but it kind of added to the interpretation of the poem. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So there are two types of forms for poetry. The first one is closed form, and these have specific rules or patterns. So I'll have a specific rhyme scheme, meter, and stanzaic pattern. The second example of form is open form. There's no particular strict rules or patterns here. So within closed forms, you'll find your sonnets and ballads. Within open form, you'll find your free verse poems. And it's pretty easy to match those up. If it's free verse, it'll be open form. If it's anything else, closed form is generally your safest bet. So let's take a minute to brainstorm. What are some ways that these two meanings or these two forms could affect the meaning of a poem? Feel free to drop some ideas in the chat, and we'll take a minute here just to pause and reflect on that. In the meanwhile, I currently just finished up finals, so I hope you guys who are taking your final exams are doing well. A little bit terrified because that exam was 2 hours long and it took me 2 hours, 10 minutes. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm going to start answering my personal interpretation of this. I feel like when a poem is more open form, the meaning of it can sometimes be a little bit more, how do I put this? The meaning of it is oftentimes more related directly to the content. With closed form, I feel like the meaning of it has its form itself tells you a lot about the poem, what the author was trying to convey. And a great example for me, again, going back to that Siren poem, was with there being no particular strict rules or anything. I felt like I was focusing a lot more on the diction, the syntax, the other specific aspects of the poem, and it kind of helped me draw together the conclusions. When you have a particular rhyme scheme and whatnot, it makes the poem flow much better. And so you're focusing more on how that beat and that meter adds to the poem. It seems like we're experiencing some technical issues. So give us a quick second. While we're waiting, I'm just going to yap a bit. You guys get to listen to me yap today. Um, I'm in college and I actually hated final season so much. Oh, okay, never mind. We're back to poetry. I was going to talk about a fun poem one of my friends wrote. She's a journalism major taking a creative writing class, and she was like, they for their final, they had to write like a poem, and she wrote about how much she hated the class. And I was like, how is your professor going to judge you well on that? That's a bold choice to make. But I feel like the stress really does get to you sometimes, which is what makes having these cram sessions so much more helpful and valuable. All right, so let's do some practice. We're going to walk together through a poem. This poem is called Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost. And I believe it was featured in one of our previews as well. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street. But not to call me back or say goodbye, and further still at an unearthly height, a luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. So, the first thing we're going to analyze is character. What do these details reveal about this character? Think about the specific actions being taken here. Think about the perspectives. What perspective is this poem being told from? The interactions this character has with other characters. So pause for a moment to brainstorm. And as always, highly encourage you guys to drop your answers into the chat. Um, Poetry is all about interpretation. And so it's really fascinating to see what other interpretations other people come up with besides my own, because it's so very different, but also so very real and applicable every time. So I see a question, is the entirety of this lecture going to be the same as the free preview? So a lot of the aspects we're actually analyzing today are different from the preview. From the preview, you might have seen us just analyze maybe the structure of a poem, like that free versus open verse. But here we're getting a lot more into the character, um, the building blocks of poetry. We're also going to be going a lot more into detail about poetry, talking about some of the more advanced units and poetic techniques, as well as looking at like the poets themselves and their craftsmanship. So don't worry, just because it's the same poem doesn't mean it's the same content. Very different things. Okay, I'm not sure if it's my laptop hating me, I don't see any chats, so I'm going to go ahead and yap a bit about what I think the details of reveal about this character. So some of the first things is number one, the repetition of acquainted with the night. It's acquainted is like not a word you'd use to describe intimacy with something. One with the night would make it sound a lot more like friendly with the night, but when acquainted with the night keeps the night at like an emotional distance. So that's some interesting diction that they use to describe their relationship with the night. They talk about the saddest city lane, that really does give the impact that they're walking everywhere. It's emphasizing that point. But the second they pass someone else, they drop their eyes, showing that there are deeper motivations behind this person going on a walk during the night besides just wanting to walk. And then you have that repetition of or not repetition, but you have that phrase, I have stood still, kind of giving that pause. Okay, I have stood still, not to call me back or say goodbye. Again, it's kind of giving that emotional distance, but it's like an unwilling emotional distance where the person wants to be drawn closer, but instead they intentionally keep themselves at a distance. That's what, in my opinion, the character does reveals from this. And the poet, the word choice here also gives this somber and reflective mood, I would say. There's a lot of depressing imagery and despair. Um, there's a lot of sense of loneliness. Don't call me back or say goodbye. So it's demonstrating this interaction between the environment and the character that's really showing the character's inner perspective. Now let's move on to the poetic structure of this. What are some features that make this poem free verse or an open form poem? And again, I'll give you guys a minute to drop in the chat. Okay, so for simplification purposes, even though a lot of these lines end in periods or have a rhyming scheme, this poem could be classified as free verse because there's this shift towards the end where sentences continue uninterrupted over the various paragraphs. And so a few things to note here would be number one, the constant rhyme scheme and stanza structure. We have this ABA pattern, night, rain, light, lane, beat, explain, beat, cry, street. It gives this sense of feeling lost and without order. That's not a very common rhyme structure, and it doesn't satisfy the beat part. But there's this shift towards the end again, which contrasts the rest of the poem. The structure is different, but so is the theme. The characters originally talking about loneliness. Now they're suddenly talking about time. And so it kind of emphasizes the character's beliefs about his existence. It's showing that they're living in a state of ambiguity and uncertainty. So, a great question that this poem brings up again is how does the structure affect the meaning of this poem? Why did the choice of free verse, or how did the choice of free verse affect the poem's interpretation? Just something to think about while we're continuing. And lastly, diction and connotation. I know kind of spoiled it a little, dropped it in earlier, but quick reminder, a poet doesn't use diction, but they their word choice is what we really focus on here. So, how does the word choice here affect the tone and mood? Sorry, I like phrased that first sentence so wrong. But remember that word choice affects the tone and mood, diction affects meaning. So, looking at those separately, how does the diction and word choice, or how does the word choice affect the tone and mood, and how does the diction affect the meaning? I'll give you guys a couple seconds to think about it. So we did briefly, or I did briefly spoil this earlier, but words like saddest, dropped, unwilling create this somber and reflective mood. But on the other hand, you have this unearthly and luminary, proclaimed. Those words, like where the clock is described as being unearthly high, proclaiming the time of the night, that change in diction there adds to the distance of the character's environment to himself. It kind of highlights the speaker's awareness of his solitude when he's looking at the sky. It just seems so far away. Everything suddenly seems so far away from him, both physically and emotionally. And now we're going to go into a practice quiz. Jasper will be taking over me from here. So thank you all so much.
Hi guys, and great job, Rashi, on presenting. I'm gonna give you guys a second to get into the quiz and start it up, and then we will walk through it, and then we'll get started on some other content. Okay, one moment. The QR code is down briefly. Sorry. Okay, and six of you guys are in. I'm gonna give it just a minute more, and then we can start the quiz. Sorry, my computer's being a second slow. Yes, do we want to turn the music on, guys? We can turn it on a little bit. If you get tired of it, then Alana can turn it down for us. But for now, we can have it. Okay. I think we should start the quiz, and anybody else who wants to know can follow along, and we'll walk through it. Okay. First question. Let me just full screen it. When analyzing a free verse poem with irregular line lengths, what is typically emphasized through this structural choice? Sorry. Taking a moment to read the options real quick. Yeah, I will The music isn't working today, guys. So if you want, I'll just start singing. Just let me know. But it looks like everybody's answered, so we can reveal the answer now. Yeah, buy some of some music. But oh, you guys all got it right. So the poet's deliberate pacing and natural emphasis reflecting speech patterns which may influence character development. So yeah, if you guys all got it right, then I don't think I have to. Oh, with the sound, with the music. Okay, hey guys, what is like a likely purpose of employing structural ambiguity with a stanza of poetry? Now we can jam, right? Wait, not hear me like audio problems, my bad, or not hear me like the music is just too good that we're tuning me out type thing. Should I be worried? Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Okay, and just a few seconds more. Okay, and that's 5 out of 5. Okay, so to create layered meanings that resonate differently with each reader. So when we're talking about structure and the purpose of it, the ambiguity creates layered meaning. Okay, okay. So this is like when Rashi was talking about how everybody can interpret poetry differently, but that doesn't necessarily make it wrong or incorrect. But the layers of specific poetry is to make it to your own interpretation with still using certain universal symbols that make it so that anybody can interpret it just in different ways, but similar ways at the same time. It's very vague and weird and yes and no, but I hope that made some sense. With that being said, we can move on to the next question. And how does the use of ambiguity in a poem's conclusion primarily affect its overall meaning? When we're thinking about this, we can think about what a conclusion reveals about a poem specifically and what that has to do with structure, like we talked about in the last episode, or ambiguity. Okay, and 66, let's see the answer. Okay, multiple interpretations and discussions about the poem's theme, just like we were talking about with the last answer, and you guys nailed it, so you already know what I'm talking about. We can move on. In what way does an author's choice to leave a poem's central theme ambiguous influence its structure? And this is along the lines of the same types of questions we've been talking about. And once again, with what Rashi was eloquently saying earlier. Oh, there's a really good question in chat if some of my hosts want to put some input on that. We'll make an argument if we can't really tell what the hot take even is. You want to put this on screen? Should I pause the quiz for this or keep going? I think that is a good question. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it on screen, but still we can keep the quiz going and talk about it during as well, unless that's too much going on. That might be too much going on. I'll let Erica think on it and we can come back to it in a second. And we're finishing up question 4 right now. Okay, and can we reveal the answer to that? Thank you. And become more open and varied for interpretation. Generally, ambiguity in art, specifically poetry, is so it can be personal and up to the interpretation of the reader. Well, we have the music back. Oh, wait, yeah, it went. I think we might need to reveal that again. It might have glitched for a second. Okay, we can go to the next one now. That's all I had to say about it. These are relatively the same. The title of the soundtrack is I didn't know that there was a specific name for it. What is the primary function of employing ambiguity within the lines of a sonnet? So this is talking about a specific structure and how ambiguity can be. I'll give you guys a minute for that too. I keep saying 6 out of 5, which I know this is English and not math, but that seems a little bit weird to me, but we can remove it, I think. Okay, and you guys got 100% to invite diverse perspectives despite its traditionally fixed form. So that's a nice way to juxtapose itself with the structure of the poem itself and the actual ambiguity of its content kind of contrasting. So we can move on. I just had to get. Which trait best distinguishes an open structured poem from one that has a closed structure when considering characters' reactions to conflicts? I really hope that in time for the exam, the cram session song is stuck in your head and plays the whole time, and that you can remember everything that you've learned during these. So it'll be like a little theme song for you. We'll take just a bit more. Okay, and we can reveal the answer now that's going. They often reflect on their experiences, openly ending without definitive answers. So open structure to closed structure conflicts. Yeah, so sorry, I totally am blanking at the moment. We're nearing the end of the quiz. And Erica, of course, answered the Q&A that we were seeing earlier. And An open structured poem that has a closed structure when considering characters' conflicts. It's very close to what I was saying earlier about ambiguity and interpretation, but just in the context of character actions, if that makes sense. I think that's how I would best explain that. And we can move on to our last question before getting right back to the slides. In literature with an open structure, how is conflict often resolved by characters? Okay, and finishing up the last one. Okay, and we can reveal it now. 6 out of 5 again. You guys are just that good that you're two people. And yeah, um, so conflict may remain partly yes, unresolved, reflecting real life complexity and uncertainty. So this cram quiz is it's to me that was funny. Sorry. This cram quiz is kind of following the theme of ambiguity and how life imitates art and art imitates life, vice versa. Conflicts not having a harsh resolve is almost always to portray that conflicts don't really have a harsh resolve in real life either. So that's wrapping up our quiz. This is why we're AP Lit and not AP Calc. Yeah, there might be 6 out of 5 of us, but you guys got 100% of that question right. And that's what I know about math. That's all you got to know. Oh, the only number you have to know is 5. You're good. And we're going to get right back into the slides now with some poetic devices. If we're ready to analyze those. But not much to fret about that. I can assure you. We looked at the survey, and there were some qualms about the vocabulary of poetic devices themselves, and I know it can be overwhelming because a lot is going on. Those are so many words, and you have to remember all of them, but you don't. You can write an essay talking about the context of a poem and using the words you mean. Like repetition, it's a poetic device. It's not something uncontrollably like hard to fathom, but it is a poetic device and it counts, and you can build a claim and use that as evidence. So these should all be things that are familiar to you, of course, but if there are certain ones that aren't, don't feel like it'll be the end of the world if you don't know every single one. I promise there will be some that will come in clutch, and that's what matters. So we can move on to actually knowing what they are now. So there's 3 types. The first type is figurative language. These are your similes, metaphors, personification, symbolism. Is personification on there twice? Yeah, it is. It's just you know it twice. And allusions, sound devices, rhyme, rhythm, alliteration, onomatopoeia, repetition, and refrain, and imagery, visual, auditory, tactile, olfactory, and gustatory. So figurative language, of course, is when something is symbolized in a specific way. Yes, you can still write an excellent essay without knowing all these devices. Don't let it overwhelm you. This is just a recap, I promise. So yeah, I cut myself off. Figurative language is when something is structured in a specific way to make it like something. It's not like a metaphor is an example of something talked about through a different lens, I think, is how I would word that. Sound devices are sound. That's the word that you have to know. It uses repetition. Onomatopoeias are sound effects, sound words. Alliteration, of course, follows that first letter of each word. And paying attention to rhyme and rhythm are very important in tone for poetry. And imagery is those 5 senses and what poetry evokes through those 5 senses. And yeah, those are the three different categories we're going to be going into today. And we can start off by looking at an example. And an example would be The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, which is, oh, wait, we also, actually, we can just use this poem, I think. Yeah, there was one in the notes, but we can just segue it. Okay. Siren Song by Margaret Atwood. Atwood. If you were here for the preview night, you heard this performed by Arnica last time. Um, this is one song everyone would like to learn, the song that is irresistible, the song that forces men to leap overboard in squadrons, even though they see beached skulls. The song nobody knows because anyone who had heard it is dead and the others can't remember. Shall I tell you the secret? And if I do, will you get me out of this bird suit? I don't enjoy it here, squatting on this island, looking at picturesque and mythical, with these two feathery maniacs. I don't enjoy singing this trio, fatal and valuable. I will tell the secret to you, only to you. Come closer. This song is a cry for help. Help me. Only you can. You are unique. At last, alas, it is a boring song, but it works every time. So, three devices. Starting off with simile and metaphor. So, as I said, maybe not so eloquently earlier, simile and metaphor are used to compare and show things as something else. So, everyone would like to learn, and the song that forces men to leap overboard. It's not something that's literally forcing men to leap overboard, or this song itself can't force men to do anything, which is something we'll get into later with personification. But it's using figurative language to convey the emotion of that. And that brings us to personification, which, as I just said, is when you take an inhuman object or force and you give it human like characteristics. Like the song is irresistible. The song is forcing men to leap overboard. And that kind of sums up those characteristics. You can hear other ones like um the sun danced in the window. The sun isn't literally dancing, but we're giving it that human-like characteristic to relate to it and to make it more visual and be able to unpack that. And this brings us to symbolism. So two feathery maniacs are a symbol for the what Margaret Atwood is depicting in the bird suit kind of symbol that she has put in here. Will you get me out of this bird suit? The bird suit itself is a symbol for the caricature that women have been made into and forced into in this gender role, as this poem is about seduction, specifically from the lens of women conforming to like a flashy bird type of thing, but not being in not enjoying that aspect of it, as you can hear with the "Will you get me out of this bird suit" line. And that brings us to a cry for help. I forgot to say that part. So sorry. Cry for help. This song is a cry for help. That in itself is the most blatant but still symbolic line, I think, in this poem specifically. By calling it a cry for help, she's saying that the song is not actually a song, but it is a cry, and in itself that is symbolic. And we can move on to the hyperbole now. Okay, so hyperbole. How does it evoke emotions? There is extreme language in here, not extreme like inappropriate, but extreme like the song everyone, exaggerated language. That's the word I was looking for. Exaggerated language and everyone. That's an absolute and irresistible. That's a very like brand word to use. So how does hyperbole evoke emotions? I will give a minute to think and type that in the chat. What impact does that have on emotions, specifically in poetry? And I'll actually set a timer for a minute so I give you a fair shot. And if we're having any trouble of thinking of it, don't worry, we can recap. So no stakes, just your thoughts. I think that's a really good point too, Erica. It like the poem itself lures you in, and it's about luring people in, and that's the timer. I don't know if you heard it, but creates strong impressions. Very true. Hyperbole affects tone and emphasis, and like what Rashi was saying about diction earlier, it evokes stronger emotions by making the words themselves stronger, if that makes sense. Is the best that's I think the most concise way to sum that up. But hyperbole, if you see hyperbole, think exaggerated, strong emotion. It kind of makes me feel bad for the sirens. People say they're manipulative, but this siren is just sweaty and bored. Dismantles the stereotype of seduction. That is a really good response. And then Erica, of course, made a really good point in the chat. The key is getting into why the poet wants to create those strong impressions. So you take step one by analyzing the fact that those strong impressions are made, and then you kind of dig deeper and you're like, okay, why do they want to make these impressions though? Why are they using these words? But that is hyperbole in a nutshell. We can move on to the next one, which is allusion. So, how does it affect the meaning of the poem? And do we know what this is an allusion to? It's a siren song. And it's kind of vague, but I'm just going to see you guys know what kind of reference this is. You don't have to. It's like I said, no stakes. We're just talking. But of course, even if you don't know what the allusion is exactly, you can still talk about how allusions affect the meaning of the poem. And I'll give another minute for that. Sorry, I'm making you do everything. But first the quizzes, now I'm making you type. Oh, goodness. I'm kidding, but still. Okay. I meant to leave those sailors to it. Yes, yes, very true. Percy Jackson reference. Yeah. Yeah, it's an allusion to Greek mythology, specifically Odysseus, biblical, Greek, and Shakespearean. That's very true. I was just talking to one of my friends while we were doing a theater festival that there are so many biblical references to everything in general. Every time we do that festival, we just riddle it with biblical references because it just makes so much literature so much richer. And Shakespearean too. I read that. I read How to Read Literature Like a Professor. That was a fun book. I had to do presentations on it. Ooh, okay. With the song being symbolic of a cry for help, it is representative of women being diminished to objects of desire. True. Their existence has been reduced to playthings that are only good for satisfying men's urges. It seems as if women are emotionless, superficial entities existing solely to seduce. That is a very rich and good answer, Michelle. I think you nailed that analysis. I agree. Ready for that five. Illusion can help a reader understand while using less words. I think that's a pretty solid answer. It's referencing other literary works to help you comprehend this one type of thing. And I think that pretty much nails illusion, and we can move on. And we can look at sound devices through an example, which is still Siren Song. So we can pay attention to what this poem sounds like. So alliteration and assonance are the first category. If we're paying attention to assonance specifically, since you can point out alliterations like come closer, and assonance, I think example like fatal and valuable, that A sound, um, even even though they see beached skulls. Assonance is that repetitive vowel sound. And we can move on to rhyme scheme 2. So rhyme scheme, there isn't a rhyme scheme, and when there isn't a rhyme scheme in free verse poems, that is also done purposefully. It's not just because the poet couldn't think of words that rhymed. It is done with purpose. And that's usually to convey a more casual tone, or if not casual, a comfortable or uncomfortable and familiar. But there is always a choice within that. And I just wanted to touch on that. But we can now move on to repetition and refrain. So there's a lot of repetition in this poem, especially towards the end. In the to you, only to you. And that's also a refrain. So oh yeah, it does seem like a song in itself. And I think that's what refrain always reminds me of, because I learned it as a musical term before I learned it as a poetic device. So this poem having a refrain seems very full circle in the bulk and analysis of it. But repetition is for emphasis. And this is like the key literary device that is always in your back pocket that you don't know about because it seems so surface level almost that you wouldn't think of it as a poetic device. But you can, whenever you recognize, repetition, you can always use it to help you out, especially in that essay. Um, and yeah, like I said, this is for emphasis and for really honing in on the subject of the poem. And as you can see, it's towards the end where the sailor is being lured in, if the reader is the sailor in this case. Now a check for understanding. In what ways can imagery intensify the emotional impact of a poem? And you can type this in chat. And of course, no pressure. And I'll set another timer to give you about a minute to respond and share your thoughts with us. It just makes it more vivid using your senses and can expand the meaning of the emotion past its literal feeling. Very true. It's to intensify it, make it relatable to you, make it in a way that's easier to fathom. I feel like a lot of times, even in speaking, a lot of people use figurative language. Like people use metaphors all the time, but imagery specifically, if you don't know how to describe something, you turn to your senses to describe it. And it's the same in poetry. It's to evoke a feeling of familiarity so that you can be hit with the poem as hard. It allows the reader to have a connection to the poem and understand the poem's viewpoints. Exactly, connecting to it. And that's our timer. So I think very good thoughts, guys. Well, I think very good thoughts, but you had very good thoughts here. And we can move on to imagery, how sensory details create vivid experiences. And yeah, the word vivid was used right there. You guys are nailing this already. Types of imagery are sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Easiest way to remember that, 5 senses. And role of imagery, enhancing themes and emotional resonance, which I think you guys nailed pretty well too. Fantastic job. And imagery is what we're looking at now. So we have the same poem still. And what are 3 different types of imagery found in this poem? You guys can list whichever one you see in the chat. The use of imagery evokes senses and emotions, familiarizing nuance by inducing strong feelings already familiar to the reader. You worded that very eloquently, Michelle. Very good. Such a way with words. I'm envious of the AP reader who gets to read whatever essay you're writing this upcoming week. And I'll set another timer so you can scan the poem and just let me know whatever type of imagery. Thank you. I try to be sweet. But yeah, any type, the ones we just went over. So it can be visual, it can be olfactory, gustatory, which is smell and taste, tactile or auditory. So touch, smell, taste, sight, hearing. Am I missing one? I don't know, but I think I've been saying them. So personally, for me, I think feathery, also the literary exclamation have helped me. Very true. I think auditory is one that gets glanced over a lot just because it's not in quotes, but just in general. But I would say feathery is a good depiction of visual. I think I'm usually more drawn to visual myself. That's the one that stands out to me first when it comes to imagery. So if that's a helpful tip for you, I don't know, it might not be well different, but I usually connect to visual imagery best. And with that being said, we can move on. Oh yeah, sight, sound, touch are the first three, or are the three in this poem, but we can move on. And now it is time for a 5 minute break. Go to the bathroom, get a snack, get some water, whatever you need to do. The evident beach schools on the beach depicting the gullibility of man. Oh wow. That's really good analysis, Michelle. And with this being said, I'm also going to join you guys on this break really quickly. And we are back from break. And I'm going to take a moment to look at the poll results. It says break check-in, doing good, feeling sleepy. Hopefully we can wake you up with this next part. And ready, feeling, how are you feeling tonight? Favorite poetic structure? We're liking free verse here. And yeah. So don't forget to look at those polls. And I'm glad you guys are doing good though. But yeah, fair to get sleepy. It's quite late for me. And that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it over to Arnica.
Hello, my name is Arnica. If you didn't meet me in our cram preview, I'm a senior and I go to a school in Edison, New Jersey. All right, and now let's get right into it. So let's start by analyzing advanced poetic structures and devices. So first, we're going to go over three just basic forms of poetic devices, and then we're going to go over it a little later with a poem. So first, repetition. That's the deliberate use of the same word, phrase, or line just multiple times to kind of emphasize a point or create a sort of rhythmic effect. And for parallelism, that's basically used to connect different ideas together. And it's basically the repetition of similar, like grammatical structures or patterns or phrases. And this can be in like adjacent lines or also consecutive lines that kind of connect these ideas together. And then for enjambment, that's basically a continuation of a sentence and ideas. And this basically it happens from one line of poetry to the next line of poetry without a pause or punctuation. And they're all used for effect. So we're going to go over with our poem, how are these devices used to create a certain type of music. All right, next slide. And now we're going to be talking about two more poetic devices. The first one is going to be juxtaposition. So that's basically the placement of two contrasting elements side by side. And this can basically highlight ideas and create tension or irony in poems or in text. And this includes examples like all is fair in love and war. So love and war are the contrasting elements. Some more elements I can think of are night and day, good and evil, war and peace, things like that. Basically. And the next poetic device we're going to be talking about is shifts. So this is basically a change in the tone, the theme, or perspective or subject matter. And this basically can happen with a single line, a stanza, or throughout the entire poem. It can also add more depth and complexity to the poem because it's going to be talking about two different things. And it can also reveal like different levels of meaning and lead to unexpected conclusions. And common shift words that let you know that this is going to be a shift in the poem are but, yet, so, however, although, and still. And all these words just signal that it's going to transition into a different topic. And then now we're going to be talking about three more poetic devices. As Jasper was saying, you don't really need to know the specific poetic devices as long as you know how they are used in the text and how to use them. So first we're going to be talking about irony. This occurs when there's like a contrast between what's expected and what actually happens. And this can this can often happen for humor or add a different level of meaning to it. So for example, if someone says what a beautiful day and it's thunderstorm of situational irony because the expectation of a beautiful day, which is a sunny day usually, contrasts with the reality of the stormy one outside. And next we're going to be talking about symbolism. So that's basically then a object, a person, or just a situation. It represents something more deep or more abstract. And this can often be a common theme or an idea. So for example, like roses and hearts, they symbolize love or passion. A dark, ominous forest could symbolize danger or like the unknown. And a dove could symbolize peace and innocence. And then ambiguity, that's basically when something is deliberately clear or open to interpretation. And it often allows for like multiple possible meanings in a text, and it's going to add a level of complexity because basically you're inviting the readers to like actively engage with the text and make their own interpretation of what's happening. And okay, so an example of this is there's a line that says like the burglar threatened the student with the weapon. So here it could mean that the burglar is the one with the weapon or the student was holding the weapon. That's just an example, but it can happen in a lot of different like themes if you look at it in different poems. All right, and now let's look at example of advanced poetic devices. So if you were here for the preview night, we did read this poem out loud, so I'll read it once again. So this is the pool players, 7 at the golden shovel. So let's read it. We real cool, we left school, we lurk late, we strike straight, we sing gin, we sing sin, we thin gin, we jazz June, we die soon. Okay, so a lot of people in the preview night were saying that this is a goofy poem. Trust me, it has a lot of complexity. It's like an onion. It's like, you know, in Shrek when they say there's like onions, this is an onion. This is an onion poem. So it's basically about these young pool players who are basically like living life on their own terms. So they're like skipping school, they're staying out late, they're just doing their own thing. So it has like this rhythmic vibe to it, and each of the lines is just like a few short words. So there's like 4 or 3 words in each of these lines. And this kind of adds to like the urgency of whatever they're doing. But underneath all that, there's definitely a sense of vulnerability and uncertainty because they're always trying to prove something to themselves and the world. And this is also shown in the last line, which everything leads up to, and it says, we die soon. So this is like the consequences of their action. All right. And then now we're going to be talking about 3 different advanced poetic devices in relationship to this poem. And they basically think about, when I'm analyzing this, think about how they help create the mood of the story, of the poem. So first, repetition. So Brooks strategically, she repeats the word we at the beginning of almost every line. At the end of the line and at the beginning of the first line. So this basically is not just a stylistic choice. It's kind of like the shared identity and the unity of the pool players. So they're not just like individuals now. They're like almost a brotherhood. So they're like standing together in their defiance. And it kind of adds that feeling of like youthful rebellion, but also with the use of like we, it kind of takes away from the individual's like own identity. They're kind of like hiding from being their own person in the comfortable space of this group, which I think a lot of us can relate to on some level as youth. But it kind of makes you wonder if their like false confidence, if their like bravado is really true, or if it's like front or a defense mechanism. And then the next one is parallelism. So the structure of each line is always going to be like we, and then a verb, and then a noun. So this kind of creates like a hypnotic rhythm, like it creates like a almost song. And this basically is almost like the beat of the life that they're living to. So like it makes their actions feel more like synchronized and combined as like one group rather than just individual people in general. And then the last one is enjambment. So this is basically when the sentence or phrase flows beyond the verse into the next line and it has no pause. So this kind of mirrors like the carefree and the relentless pace that these pool players are living in. And so the break between like, so we have like we real cool and then we left school. The break between we and left school, it doesn't just take you to the next line. It kind of feels like you're along with them for like whatever they're doing. And there's kind of like a suspense built by forcing the reader to basically read the action along the line break when the subject is already repeated and already know. We already know that it's like we, but they still repeat it in every line. And this kind of serves to emphasize like the final line, and it's like, oh wow, the consequences of our actions, we die soon. And then now I have a question for you guys. So how are these devices used in the poem to create a certain type of mood? I'm just going to give you about a minute first. Like that someone in the comments, they said, I feel like the no period at the we die soon showed a premature and unfinished ending, showing that they rushed too much. Yeah, so that's basically like the consequence of living a little too recklessly and showing too much like false confidence in this poem. that is there's a really good analysis. And then the laconic style of the poem shows the ephemeral nature of joy with a sudden. Yes, I really like this one too. Laconic is a really nice word. I like that. Just waiting for any more responses. Yeah, but the punctuation is always very interesting to analyze because the author's always trying to come up with, they always like deliberately choose their punctuation. They're not just like putting the period at the end of be real cool and be left school at the end of each of these phrases. They're not doing that they're not doing that just because it's fun. They're doing that for a reason. And it's our job to figure out why. But yeah, all of your analysis for that I saw in the comments were very adaptive. Okay. Oh, I think it's also telling that the sentences are so brief. Their lives are so short because they skip school. They don't have the education to create more complex sentences. Ambiguity, yes, this is so true. And I was also talking about ambiguity a little in the previous slides, and this is so true. All right, great analysis, guys. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, and now one more example poem. All right, so for this one, I want you guys to kind of point out where the shift occurs in this poem. And let me read it out to you guys. So this is Sonnet 18 by William Shakespeare. Now, I'm no Shakespeare nerd, but I hope I can do this poem justice. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from far fair it sometimes declines by nature or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou ownst, nor shall that brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growst. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long this lives, and this gives life to thee. All right. We love this poem, and I just want you guys to kind of let me know where the shift occurs in this poem. Let's see if you guys can know it. I'll just give you about like 30 seconds for this. Oh, and also I did see some really good analysis after about the previous one, and I think you guys all captured the nuances of the poem very well. You guys are cooking. All right, so that's okay if you didn't find where the shift occurs. Let's point it out in the next slide. So we do want to note that the shifts occur when we have common shift words like but, yet, so, however, although, and still. And shifts in sonnets, which this was, it usually occurs at line 9. So the line where the shift occurs is the one where it says, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed, but thy eternal summer shall not fade. So this is where the poem kind of shifts. Before the shift, he's kind of talking about like comparing the person to a summer's day, but also pointing out like all the drawbacks of the weather, like the winds and how it's so short and how there's like different temperatures. And then he brings in the but, and that kind of changes everything. So he's talking about how the person's beauty kind of surpasses summer and it'll last forever, unlike the seasonal weather that comes and goes. So it kind of sets up for the end of the poem where it just like the couple, because it says like all natural beauty that eventually fades. And I don't know if you guys have read The Outsiders, but nothing gold shall stay, or It was something like that. It was like nothing gold shall last or something. But it's basically that idea that the beauty of the person that he's about is like forever immortalized in this poem, and it's kind of saying that the beauty will live on forever, even though summer's beauty might not. And I did see someone say that it serves as a shift. It serves as a shift, bringing up a contrasting point to the disappearance of the summer in the previous lines. That is correct. And the shift on line 9 with the word, but which also helps the different feeling that summer is disappearing, but will not be forgotten. Yep, that is very accurate. It does acknowledge that we are still reading the poem, so we use it. Yeah, that's so true. Because now we do know that his love actually was everlasting because it's immortalized on paper, which is so cute. And you guys did accurately point out the purpose of this shift. Okay, great job. Let's move on. Okay, now we're going to move on to analyzing poetic structure and form. So Rashi did read this poem in the beginning, and now we just have a little snippet of the first 2 stanzas of Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost. So in here, there's a lot of good examples of structure and form that kind of make the poem what it is and kind of show the meaning of the poem. So first, we're talking about meter and rhythm. So meter is kind of when there's syllables that stress to create different moods. And so basically, Robert Frost, he uses a very consistent meter, and he uses the rhythmic repetition of the phrase "I have." He uses this a lot in this poem to mirror the kind of solitarity that the speaker faces, and how he just methodically just walking throughout the night. And so it basically uses like a stressed syllable and then an unstressed syllable, and this kind of reflects that he has a never-ending journey, and it kind of heightens the mood of loneliness and reflection in this poem. And also the repetitive structure of like the I have, it emphasizes like his own state of mind right now, and it builds the monotony that he is facing in his life. It's kind of like we are walking alongside him, facing the steps of his night. And then the next one is stanzas. So we see that we have 3 lines in every single stanza, and the variation in the form has thematic significance in every single poem that we read. So in Acquainted with the Night, he's basically breaking up this poem into stanzas, and it's kind of taking little snapshots of the speaker's journey throughout the city. And this kind of keeps things moving along and makes it a very focused and monotonous vibe, which is kind of what the poem is going for. And you can almost feel like the rhythm of the steps as they walk through the darkness, and it creates a sense of flow as well. And then in poetry, as Jasper was mentioning earlier, there are 2 forms. There's closed form and open form. Open form is like free verse, basically. There's no strict rules or rhythm or meter. But closed form is more structured, and it has a set meter and rhyme scheme. So in this poem, Frost does use examples and elements of both open and closed form. So the poem itself doesn't really adhere to a specific meter, so it gives it more of an open form that kind of mirrors the unpredictability of the night itself. And this lack of like strict structure kind of allows him to capture the speaker's sense of freedom as they wander through the darkness. But however, with this open form, he does have a sense of closure through the repetition of the phrase, and also consistent uses of the 3 sentence stanzas, because these are consistent throughout the entire thing, except for the couplet at the end. And this kind of creates like a sort of closed form in a sense, which kind of adds cohesion to a speaker's journey as he's compartmentalizing how he's feeling in the night. All right, and then for rhyme scheme, there's a more flexible rhyme scheme in this poem, and it does contribute to the poem's overall mood. It basically has 14 lines, just like a sonnet in general, and it has this 3rd rhyme scheme, and it has the pattern of like A, B, A, and B, C, B, and C, D, C, and then the end couplet with the A, A. And this kind of adds like a sense of structure to the poem, and it enhances the lyrical quality, and it kind of just draws your attention to certain points in the poem. And now I'm going to ask you guys a question. How do closed and open structures in poetry influence a reader's interpretation? And I'm going to just give you about a minute for this. So feel free to put any thoughts you have on this in the chat. Yeah, these are absolutely right. So someone said that open structure evokes ambiguity, creating unanswered questions that develop the meaning of the poem as one that has several nuanced meanings. That is correct. That does happen. Um, yeah, that is true. Open structures do feel more inviting and free, and we can definitely see that in this poem where he uses both open and closed structure. So then we know that he is a little inviting and free, but he also has this emotional distance and isolation from everyone as in his life. Um, the poet is not bound by certain patterns. These are very good answers, guys. You're eating. Okay. For now, we can move on to the next slide. All right, and then here are three more examples of structure and form. So first, we're going to talk about syntax. So that's kind of like the building blocks that poets use to create their poems. It's kind of like how they arrange words to create a certain type of rhythm, flow, and just meaning in their poems in general. And they kind of can play around with this to create whatever effect they are going for. So in this poem, the syntax is kind of reflective of his own thoughts. There's very like simple sentence structure that is about the same length on every single same length of every single line, and this kind of conveys his very clear emotions. Like he knows what he's feeling, and it kind of creates a sense of solitude and contemplation because it's very concise and very rhythmic language. And we're going to talk about punctuation now. So he basically uses the punctuation to guide the reader to his own feelings. So, for example, commas, they create like pause and emphasize his own contemplation, and periods provide like closure to the thought. And then, so if we look at the example on line 6, it says, and drop my eyes, unwilling to explain. So there's a comma in between and drop my eyes and then unwilling to explain. And that kind of creates like a sense of isolation. Like not even the watchman is relating to him or connecting with him right now. He feels so isolated from the world around him. And then, for example, in line 2, if we see the use of the dash where it says, I walked out in the rain and back in the rain. So it kind of feels like he's sick of being so miserable. He's sick of facing like sorrow after sorrow. Nothing's getting better for him right now. And yeah, okay. And now we're going to be talking about patterns. So there's a lot of different patterns that you can notice in a poem. So there's like parallelism, antithesis, and repetition. So he's kind of creating like a more rhythmic and balanced structure that kind of reflects his own journey right now. So this is kind of used in phrases like I have been once acquainted with the night, and how like the line in line 2, which it says I walked out in the rain and back in the rain. This is basically using similar structure to mirror the speaker's repetitive actions and experiences. And it also happens, this is just a snippet of the poem, so it doesn't show this, but also um, they repeat the line, I have been acquainted with the night in the beginning and at the end of the poem. So he just like emphasizing this one point to us. And that's true. The pauses in the poems are very intentional and they're always there for a reason. The poet is always going to be using these pauses to emphasize a certain point and a certain theme. And now for repetition. Repetition actually, as Rashi mentioned earlier, it kind of serves to emphasize key motifs and key themes, and it reinforces the overall structure and rhythm. So as I was mentioning earlier, the phrase I have that repeats throughout the poem, it kind of creates a sense of monotony in his life. And now I'm going to ask you guys a question. How does the structure and form of the poem enhance its impact? And think about all the different forms of structure and form that we have been talking about. So I'm going to give you guys just about a minute for this. right, seeing some great answers coming in. So the first one says the structure of the poem affects the type of theme or feeling that the reader gets a sense of feeling of order or feeling of chaos. The form of the poem also affects the flow of how the poem is read. That is so true. It does affect how the poem is read because as poetry is kind of meant to be read out loud, we kind of feel the emotions of the reader and the emotions of the speaker as we read and as we see all these different pauses and different punctuation. The repeating of the phrase walked and outlawed brings a sense of drudgery to the poem, emphasize that it's all in the rain too. Yeah, the rain just adds to this whole like melancholic tone and mood in the story. And syntax can show how complex the thought is, as a lengthier sentences can show greater thought, as shorter ones can, represent more simpler or basic ideas. And yeah, that is true. In this poem, we see more like simple lines where he just explaining what's going on in his life, and it basically shows that he just has the emotional capacity to just explain what's going on right now, and nothing really more than that, and that can show a lot. And great answer, you guys really got it. We'll move on to the next one, and now we're going to move on to analyzing poetic theme and tone. All right, so first, themes in literature kind of act as reflections of society's values and criticisms. So they're kind of like mirrors showing what we prioritize as a society and what we can be questioned in society. So with the use of different poetic devices like metaphors, symbolism, imagery, language, thematic analysis can basically be more richer and more engaging to the audience because they kind of simplify and amplify. They amplify the message with the theme and make them more rich and vivid and more thought-provoking in general. So some examples of common themes that we see in literature are war, death, love, nature, just a lot of these universal things that a lot of us can relate to. And we also have tone, which basically serves as the emotional backdrop for the piece, and it shows the poet's stance towards the subject. So in the poem we just read, there was a tone of melancholy. So when we connect the different themes, the tones, and the literary devices, such as symbolism or imagery, we kind of deepen our own understanding of the poem's message and mood. So if we use diction, for example, the choice of words and the details, they add layers and they shape the tone and reinforce the theme. So together, these elements can create a more comprehensive poetic experience, and it can kind of guide the readers through the poem and the poet's meaning and his mood. And we can move on to the next one. And now we're going to put it all together. So I'm not sure if our co-host is a moment. All right, so I'm just going to give it off to my wonderful co-host Jasper, who will take you to advanced poetic devices. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Arnica, for your lovely presentation. And we're going to go back into putting it all together. And this is Siren's song once again. And looking at these next little blurb, please, that's where our question is that we're going to be looking at. So Arnica did a great job wrapping up and kind of diving into more advanced poetic devices like irony, ambiguity, and symbolism. And the question is, how does irony, ambiguity, and symbolism contribute to the themes and tone of this poem? If you guys can go back and recall the themes we were discussing in this poem specifically in terms of seduction and gender roles and conforming to those gender roles. I'll give you about a minute to think, and if it takes longer than that to type, that's a-okay. We'll talk about what we have and we can talk through it. No pressure at all. And about 20 more seconds. Okay, and if we're taking a little bit of time, that's okay. This is kind of a more loaded question. And the next one's about to be two, but we have a break coming up soon, so don't even fret it, guys. But irony and ambiguity, I have such a it's a hard time saying that word. But and symbolism contribute to the theme and tone. In what way? We talked a lot about ambiguity with the cram quiz earlier and how it leaves it up to different readers' interpretations and how there's usually a not central theme, but there's a through line tying the poem together and forms of different interpretations that kind of connect, but it's generally open ended so that each person can connect to the art in different ways. And there's a sense of irony within the poem itself. In we have an answer. Okay, let's see. The portrayal of a song to depict an inner desperation for help is symbolic of how desirability ultimately serves as a source of neurosis for women. Attractiveness and seductiveness are qualities that have long been used to dehumanize women. It's ironic that the song is described as forcing the men to jump off their boat, yet the song is also about being forced on the sirens. Very true. I was just about to talk about how the juxtaposition of both of those qualities, of how there's force and into that specific role as well, kind of creates force for both parties. But the character, the sirens that are usually depicted as the villain, are more depicted as the villain. So it's a cry for help. They say very, or Margaret Atwood puts very bluntly near the end of that poem. These are some really strong responses, guys. And it's good that we're tying together these keywords for the essay, which we'll also get into quickly. Or soon, I meant. But we can move on to the next question now. Thank you. And this is back to Acquainted with the Night, which you heard from Rashi and again from Arnica. And the question here is, what is the literal meaning? What is the figurative meaning? Remember key elements like imagery, tone, and theme. So, using those key elements just described, we can talk about the difference between the literal and figurative meaning, both of which were touched on. But if you guys want to just take a minute, set another timer. If you want to take another minute just to summarize that kind of thing or put them into words, both the literal and figurative meaning, we can do that. And then we'll be heading to a quiz. Okay. Awesome, Jonathan. Literal, a man is aware of the night in his city by walking around in the rain. Figurative, the rain is symbolic of the isolation. Awesome word this man is feeling. That is exactly how the word I would use, the one that came to mind. Night is not just a time of literal darkness due to a lack of sunlight, but also a time of social and emotional darkness. That is a really great response. This reminds me of earlier when I was kind of hinting at how there's universal symbols, and Arnica provided lovely examples of a rose depicting love and passion. And while not everything always means the same things, like maybe a rose, if it's withering, it wouldn't always mean love, but a lack thereof instead. Certain symbols won't always mean the same things, but often there are pretty universal symbols, like gloomy weather or destroyed houses or something like that, and the shapes of certain things. And rain usually meaning isolation. And he's alone in this walk down the city during the night. So that has to do with the darkness emotionally and the isolation that he's feeling while he's on this walk by himself. So there are certain universal symbols, like the ones just listed, that you can take from poetry that even if it doesn't mean that 100% of the time, unless it's used to kind of contradict itself, you can usually rely on it leading you down a certain path when it comes to analysis. And with that, we can move on to the cram quiz. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys to use the link that we're going to put in the call to action. It'll be right beneath me right there. Quiz number 2. And if you guys need... Okay. Yeah, and if you need the link, I think we can put it in chat if possible. But I think that the button should work fine. So let's just make sure we're getting in there. Oh, and I'll read Michelle's response while we're waiting. Well, the poem depicts the speaker's nighttime promenade. I can't say that word, I'm so sorry. Through a bleak, desolate city, the speaker details how they have exiled themselves from society as they express their disdain for man. Very well put. I love your choice of the word desolate, bleak, disdain. The diction that you use is very reflective of the poem itself, and I think that's a very good tone to kind of keep consistent when you're thinking about analysis, especially in this case. And we have about 6 people in. I know this is the number we had last time, I think. Was it 5, actually? And then there was just a mystery Timmy in there. But either way, I'll give about 30-ish seconds just to be sure. And then once we're in, I'm pretty sure you can join later as well. So we don't have to have like everybody in order for people to answer. And if you just need to follow along, then you need to follow along. Say okay. But I'm gonna wait about 15 more seconds. Oh, it's dropping. Guys, don't leave me. Okay, you're back. You're back. Not the actual screen, the number of participants. Sorry, I should have been clear. Okay. I'm gonna say we can go ahead and start it. And we'll keep it in music a little bit down. So these might not be as related to the content we just went over, but they will be related to the MCQ in general. They are previous questions, so it's not taken from previous MCQs, but this will be related to AP Lit content. We had a slight mishap, but all is well. I promise this will still be stuff that you should be knowing. And it is all good. Just do your best and we can talk about it. And then it's like 2 crayons in 1. And it is about poetry, so it's fun. So I didn't read the question, I will read it now. Oh wait, we have everybody answered. Okay, let's review it. Sorry. Okay, and you got a 100% by symbolizing desolation or internal coldness and disconnection. A winter landscape. This mirrors the poem we were just talking about closely, just instead of rain, it's snow. So that's another symbol and theme that you can look at for imagery and for theme is weather. That's a very, very big tell. And we can move on to the next question. How does varying line length contribute towards depicting internal versus external conflicts within poems? You guys are doing awesome, by the way. I'm very proud of you. I just got Red Bull on my glasses. And about 2 more people. Those answers in. I know these are kind of hefty answer choices. So you're good. And we have 6 out of 6. Can we reveal that answer, please? Shorter lines may depict sudden emotional outbursts, while longer ones may reflect contemplative thought processes regarding internal struggles. This reminds me of a poem that I read, and it was an allusion to the opera. I think it was Madame Butterfly is what it was alluding to. And a lot of the poetry, or a lot of the lines were cut off abruptly because it was depicting an anxiety attack. So if you find poetry, or if you come across poetry that's meant to depict a more frantic or emotional state, then it might be structured or worded in shorter lines, or have cutoffs or hyphens, or be structured in a way that's meant to look like a spiral, if that makes sense. And we can move on to the next question. How does a consistent use of direct address throughout a poem contribute to its narrative voice? So I have to remember to use full screen on the cram quizzes, because I cannot read when text is like that tiny. I'm the type of person to zoom in on Google Docs while I'm like on my Chromebook or something for school. And we're almost there. We're getting these pretty quick too. No mystery to me participant this time though. I wonder where he went. Maybe he's smacking people in the face. He's busy. Okay, and we have everyone answered. Let's take a look at it. It creates an engaging conversational tone between speaker and reader. Yeah, when a poem is speaking directly to you, the reader, or it's directly addressing you, it's to make a more personal relationship. It's kind of similar to when a poem is free verse, but not always, of course. But when a poet is trying to depict a more casual conversational tone, and often we've made the connection that a free verse poem can be used to show that conversational tone, just like how direct address would be doing that as well. It's just all about different tactics and writing styles, but we can move on to the next question. Poetry, how might a poet use stanza breaks effectively to convey shifts in conflict? And just one more participant. And then after this, we have 2 questions left, and then a 10-minute break, by the way, guys. So stay tuned. Okay, we have 6 out of 6. Let's reveal that answer. Bylining stanza breaks with shifts in tone or events to signal change or escalation in conflicts. This is similar to what I was saying earlier, because stanza breaks and line breaks can be kind of similar in that way, where they're both related to structure, which is a building block we were talking about earlier. And it's either to convey a shift or to take that shift and kind of elevate it. If it's in that kind of spiral thing I was talking about earlier. But if it's a change or an escalation, that's the kind of thing that I was trying to do there, in conflict, then it can shift to a different event separately. It's really just about structure and how the poet kind of sees that vision, whether it's breaking off a line or breaking off a stanza. It's done with purpose, and it's either an escalation or a shift. next one. How does dissecting the structure of a poem help readers interpret its purpose? We were just talking about structure. This is perfect. You guys got this. Very true, Erica. I think that like digesting art is the best way to become your own artist. And it's kind of cute because everybody's just like a mosaic of all of the artists that have come before them, type of thing. And when you become aware of the other patterns that people do, then you can develop your own. But I have started looking at lines and stanzas a lot more lately. We can reveal the answer now. I was yapping. By recognizing patterns and contemplating their purpose. I think that's the best way to put that as well. A lot of poetry is patterns or the lack of patterns, and it all means something. The door is always blue for a reason, type of thing. And we can move on to our last one. What is the purpose of a repeated refrain in a poem? We were talking about refrains. It's gonna be stuck in my head for maybe the rest of my life after these 5 nights, I think. You guys were quick with this one. We were ready for that break. I don't know how you're feeling. I'm not you, but whatever. We're close to it. Okay, 6 out of 6. Let's see. Yay! 100% emphasis. Repetition, I always think emphasis. Diction, I always think tone. Those are your life hacks to end the quiz with. And on that note, we can go back to the slides, Alana. Oh, it's me for a little bit. Hi, guys. It's gonna say 5 minutes, but it's actually 10 because you get a secret double break. You're so welcome. Okay, and we're gonna start it. Double break, because you're just that good. You're just that good that you can take a whole 10 minutes. And that means that I will also take a whole 10 minutes, so I'll join you. Are we all back and ready? We ready for this? It's time for the moment you guys have all been waiting for, okay? It's the essay. It's the poetry essay. Um, so let's get into it. Don't be too alarmed. It'll be okay. You already know what you need to know, trust me, but we'll get into what you got to remember for it and some tips and strategies for you as well. So you want to focus on a strong thesis. So this thesis should present as a defensible interpretation of the poem, examine specific poetic devices, and explain the effect the devices have on the passage. So this is making a claim with using evidence and explaining that. So this shouldn't be too different from essays that you've written before in your high school career. And an example of this, using a poem that we've already talked about tonight, is although within the poem Acquainted with the Night, the narrator is simply partaking in a night stroll, Robert Frost utilizes repetition and stanza separation to demonstrate how this time to himself presents a reflection on life and feelings of existential dread. So you're taking your analysis and putting it into words. And I've noticed already you guys are quite good with this. So you should not be freaked out by it. We've already talked about analyzing the poems. We've already talked about themes, tones, and poetic devices. So all you have to do is put that all together. And that can kind of seem overwhelming at first. But if you just take it in the steps that we taught you, or the steps you're familiar with, whatever works for you, then it shouldn't be all too overwhelming. It just has to be one step at a time. Like what I usually do is I read it once, I read it twice, and I look at the devices that stand out to me. And I make a claim that goes with the prompt and which devices best support that claim. I always do little bullet points, especially since it's a virtual exam now. At least it is for me. I don't know if that's a universal thing, but um, even in general, you can make little notes of which ones you want to remember or circle what you need to remember, what devices you're thinking of using for your claim. And then you can underline, circle, go over any parts that you think will best support that. Not your universal yet, will be next week. Thank you, Erica. Okay. So then yes, do this on paper, on whatever. Still on paper for my school is this year. Got it. Okay. So then in that case, circle, underline, whatever you need to do to highlight what stands out most to you and what supports your claim. So in this case, repetition and stanza separation are used to defend this claim. And it's always good to have more than one. Whatever you can use, whatever you can think of. You don't want it to be too hefty so that you're spending all your time on one of the FRQs or on one part of the essay. I remember at the beginning of the year specifically, I was kind of nervous about the idea of the amount of essays that I would have to write because I didn't take AP Lang. But through practicing, I've noticed that you just have to take every part of it one step at a time as well, and that is the same with time management. But yeah, that was my like yap fest on the thesis, and we can move on to more parts of the essay. So evidence, this is part of what I was talking about. That was just the essay, the thesis alone, but this is the evidence in using it. So the repetition and stanza structure, I did already yap about this, are the pieces of evidence that you're using. And this is, I think, why we stress the poetic devices so much, so you can know what to point out. And of course, like I said, like Arnica said, like it's been established, do not feel the need to go through and find the most niche and obscure poetic devices that you have to memorize, because there are definitely ways to talk around something if you know what you mean, but can't find the exact words for them. But I've seen that you guys are pretty good at articulating your thoughts and your analysis, which is awesome. But even if that doesn't reflect on test day and you just can't remember the word for something, like the other day, I couldn't remember the word indestructible when I was trying to write an FRQ, so I just had to write around it. And that's okay, because you don't have to remember every word for everything just because it's an English class. They'll get what you mean. But yeah, so using this evidence as support explores the complexities within a poem and more pinpoints what you mean and supports that claim in your thesis. And we can move on. And it's also important to look at the bigger picture. Whatever you're analyzing, you should look at it within the context of the time that it's written. And if that's provided to you or just something that you happen to know, that can make your analysis richer. If you don't happen to know, I wouldn't sweat it. Of course, it's supposed to be a draft. They're supposed to give you the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, of course. And reference what Erica said in the chat. Um, they know that you wrote this essay in the amount of time given to you in a few hours. This is not something that you were given weeks or days or multiple class periods to work on. This is a rough draft essay. You do not have to have it perfect. Um, so don't let that aspect stress you out either, because that was definitely something I was worried about. And now that I've practiced more and I feel more comfortable with the content, I know that AP graders want to give you that point. That doesn't mean that they're going to like go out of your way and show up and be like, what did you mean by this? But they are more willing to give you the point if they can see where you're coming from. But yeah, back to the bigger picture, of course, if you understand time period, like with Acquainted for the Night, Acquainted with the Night, it was important that it was written during the Roaring Twenties, and this isolation and poverty and suffering that's alluded to in the poem itself is in the context of the Great Depression. So if you're noticing certain themes, certain allusions to different things in time, elements in time that could be tied to something specific, then that's definitely something. Oh, sorry. That's definitely something that you want to take into consideration, because that can broaden what you can analyze and what you can pinpoint, and even what poetic devices you should be paying attention to. We can move on. And now it's for the time for the poetry recap. We're going to be looking over everything we looked over today, just in forms of question and a little summary. So the building blocks of poetry and what you can be looking at first. This is what we were talking about with the character exploration and the structure and open and closed form, diction and connotation. And this leads us to the question, what type of form does a particular poem have? So that being your opening question and the first thing you look at, like I said, diction is the first thing that I look at. That's my easy like go-to, but a lot of the times it's structure. That's a pretty easy one to look at. A lot of the time it can be character, it can be any of those, to kind of like see the outline of the poem itself, as opposed to trying to like dive in head first when you haven't even fully gauged it yet. You can give yourself time to process it and pick it apart piece by piece. What paragraph structure should we use for the essays? I have been doing a brief intro for thesis, and then using a claim, and then the poetic devices and the evidence for each of those, and then another set of evidence and like claims evidence. I don't know if I'm wording this well. If any student host wants to type this out, or any of their suggestions either, you can do that. Yes, thank you. Okay, Alana did it. 2 to 3 paragraphs and a brief conclusion. That is, yeah, thank you. That is what I wanted to say, but I was trying to do it point by point because I'm a very part by part person. But yeah, you do not need a formal conclusion. And I'm glad that Alana included that, because that's what I was going to get to. But it's good to restate your thesis, because that is what gets you that other point. Do readers deduct points if they think that your essay is poorly organized in terms of your paragraph? So I know that there's a sophistication point, but I know that that's not reliant fully, or even partially, like on organization. It's just in the sophistication of your writing, and it's very similar to AP Lang from what I've heard in that way. That it's just kind of not do you know what you're talking about, but do you know what you're talking about kind of thing. And feel free anyone to correct me because, like I said, I was not an AP Lang kid, so this is kind of my forte. So I can't speak on anything else. But um, I would say stress less about it having to look polished and perfect because it really doesn't. As Erica said, I think this was a really, really good point to remind people. It is oh yeah, no points are deducted. I forgot it. You only get points. Yes, sorry, I should have addressed that too. But it's supposed to be a draft. It's not supposed to be polished and perfect. Um, and I was gonna say also, Alana, yes, Michelle, you've been crushing it. I do not think you have anything to worry about. And circling back to the recap, because I did get a little bit distracted. Um, but we're going to be looking at analyzing poetic devices as part of the recap. This is what I was talking about way back at the beginning of the cram session. And this is that figurative language, the sound devices, and those kinds of devices that you're looking at that are going to be your vocab words, as well as imagery, and the kinds of things that just stand out to you that you can use as evidence in your essay. And advanced poetic devices, which is what Arnica was talking about, and this is the repetition, parallelism, enjambment, juxtaposition, shifts, irony, ambiguity, symbolism, paradox, and ambiguity again as a little treat. How do sound devices highlight a poem's theme or message? And oh yeah, I brought up sound devices a second ago, but that's the question for that. And how these tie together each part of the poem. I kind of view the order we went in today as levels, because you can look at the building blocks, like you look at structure or tone first, and then you look deeper and you're like, oh, there's a metaphor here, there's an allusion, there's onomatopoeias, and then you're like, okay, well, this juxtaposes this, and this is a symbol for this. And then you can, that was very vague, but I hope you know what I mean by the process. It's like a very meticulous way to extract certain things without it all being just a bunch of different flying parts and you don't know which one to look at first. I think this format helps if you're kind of stuck on where to start. And we can move on, that being said. Next slide, sorry. And this goes to the basics of poetic analysis, which is exploring and investigating on how form and structure contribute to the overall theme, which is once again what I was saying with how you start and then you take the theme and tone away from that. But how does the poet establish their poem's theme? And that's kind of what I just said a second ago with all the devices and how that's communicated and the different levels of extracting that. And interpreting theme and tone is identifying the central themes of the poem, analyzing how tone contributes to the overall meaning and mood of the poem, and how does the tone of the poem contribute to its theme. So how does the tone morph that theme that's paying attention to diction and word choice and repetition or any figurative language or sound devices or just devices in general that lead you to shift that to that theme and how that is shown and what choices the author makes. And writing the poem essay, what we were just talking about, formulating a clear thesis that prevents a defensible interpretation of a poem using evidence and identifying and exploring complexities. How can you craft a specific and defensible thesis? So this is very prompt specific of how to craft a thesis, but you should be restating the prompt with your sound devices and have a strong claim that picks a stance within it so that you can back it up with evidence and it should be clear. And we're going to do another quiz. And I think this one will also be linked below instead of the QR code, as far as I know. And I'll keep you guys posted on that. So we'll take a second to get that link up and then we can start that quiz. Okay, quiz number 3 is right there. So click that green button. and we can do last quiz. Or there might be some more after this as like a little treat. But this is our third one at least. And you can't see the quiz. Oh, it's not up yet. The link, the quiz itself hasn't started yet, but the link to join it should be right there, and then the main quiz itself will be up in just a second. Sorry, it's taking a moment. And Jonathan also sent a quiz. Yeah, the link to it. And thank you, Alana. We have Alana sharing it for us right now. Okay. And right now it says 0 participants joined for me, so I'm going to let you guys take a minute to get into that. And if it's taking a second, that's okay. Make sure you join using the QR code. No. Okay, yeah. Make sure that you're scanning this QR code and not the old one that was on the slides. The button. Oh, okay. So sorry, guys. I think that the link is not the right one. So if you can just scan the QR code, that would be great. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties. We will have the quiz up and running in a second. I was just about to ask if everybody could get in smoothly or if it was just glitching and saying no one was in it. Okay, and we have an updated button. So if you want to click that button, if that's what you were using before, then it's right there, or the QR code is on screen. Okay, and now you're in. Yay. Okay. We'll wait just a minute because that was a little bit of chaos. There's usually a bit more of you. So I'll wait a minute and then we can start the quiz. Okay. Oh no, we lost one. Guys. Okay, you're back. That happened last time too. I was like, oh no, they're leaving me. We're in this together, guys. On that note, though, I think we're gonna start it. And 6. Okay, so that's the pretty consistent number of the night I've noticed. So I usually wait for 6. We can start it now, Alana. Thank you. In a sonnet that shifts from despair to hope at the end. At the volta, what is the most likely impact of the structural choice on the poem's meaning? And then I'm full screening it again so that I don't have to get this close to you to read it every time. But I'll probably forget. So. And this one has some questions. So hold on tight, guys. And we're hanging on for one more participant. Oh wait, there's 2. There's 7. Is Timmy here? Did Timmy join? Oh wait, never mind. It's back to 6. Sorry, I scared him. Didn't mean to do that. Okay, and then I'm gonna give the last participant just about a few more seconds to get that answer in. If you don't get it, if you're stumped, no worries. We'll talk about it. Don't fret, we got Okay, I'm gonna say we can reveal the answer. It's okay if nobody got to, if there's somebody. It emphasizes the contrast between 2 emotional states. So yeah, if it's a shift between hope from despair to hope, that's a pretty drastic change. But 2 emotional states can be depicted in that because that is 2 of them. But there's a contrast within that, and it's juxtaposing it by the end of the sonnet. So we can move on to the next one. What purpose does juxtaposition? Oh my gosh, guys, I keep predicting it. I keep foreshadowing it. Literary reference. Serve when developing themes related to conflict in poetry. 7 participants again. Guys, Timmy's back. We're going to take just about a minute to get all those answers in. And of course, if my summaries after the questions aren't clarifying what is getting you on these questions, you can always drop something in the Q&A section or in the chat, and either me or one of the lovely other hosts will debrief that for you and will help you out. Okay, and we can reveal the answer now that everybody's answered. And that's 100% too. It highlights contrasting ideas or emotions to underscore tension. Contrast is juxtaposition. That is a hefty word that took me embarrassingly long to understand in my educational career, to be honest. But contrast is your keyword. Another life hack. You have tone for diction, and the other one I said, exaggeration for hyperbole, and now you get contrast for juxtaposition. So there you go. If you can remember the secret bonus one, I can't right now, but there you go. Yes, AP Lit loves contrast. How does environment affect a reader's perception of the poem? And we're hanging on for that one last participant. Okay. Sorry, I never mean to rush anybody when I say that. I just don't want you to think I'm blank staring. Okay. Enjambment can create a sense of continuity and speed up reading. Yeah, so this is what Arnica was talking about with that cutoff, right? And this goes back to the kind of pace and disrupting lines and kind of thing. So there's a relationship to continuity with that and sped up and pace. And I think with a lot of sound devices specifically, not all of them, but with a lot, pace is definitely something to take into consideration and how fast it's meant to be read. I tend to read things pretty fast generally, but when things have like longer syllables or longer vowels specifically, another thing you can pay attention to is assonance and consonants. I'm so bad at actually saying literary devices, but I promise I can read them. But yeah, so those are things to look at when you're thinking about sound and pace and that kind of stuff. And we can look at C, strictly controls rhythm by aligning with natural speech pauses. So it's not quite natural as I would put it, but I can understand why you would put that one because of rhythm. And that is very closely related to sound and pace and that kind of thing. So I can see where that idea would align. But I would definitely say that continuity and speeding up and that kind of thing is more in that field of enjambment, if that makes sense. And with that, we can move to the next question. Poem, where a character faces moral conflict, has a figurative language helps emphasize ethical dilemmas. Sorry, I was sleeping. Okay. But now we can go to reveal answer. Thank you, Alana. And metaphor. So this was a bit of a tricky one because it wasn't as suggested that specifically. But let's look at alliteration and literal description. So I can understand both of these. I know where your heads were at. Understand literal description in the sense of like you can outright say ethical dilemmas, but the figurative language piece I think nods to one of the other three more. So I would look to more figurative language, especially if it says I was gonna say ethical dilemmas, but it does say figurative language. Let's read that part. And B and C. So B is alliteration. Alliteration is more of a sound device than figurative language, which are very close together. But alliteration, again, is the same letter starting a word. So, like, apples always are angry. Well, I don't know if R would be, but, you know, that's the A. So that's more sound and tone in that kind of field than figurative language with ethical dilemmas. Though it can reinforce figurative language and maybe suggest an ethical dilemma somehow, I would say that metaphor is more on the nose. And with that, we can move on to question 5. What effect might irregular meter have on it? I told you I wasn't gonna lean in, and then I did. What effect might irregular meter have on an improvised, orderly structured scenario? After this one, we're going to be halfway done with this one. And we'll be moving on to another quiz. Another one. Okay, about 4 out of 6. Oh, 5 out of 5. Okay, we can reveal the answer. And okay, it introduces tension or dissonance that highlights key terms or emotions. Back to my okay. So let me look at A then. Eliminates any sense of pattern or repetition inherent in a given else form. Okay, so I understand. Okay, so the irregular meter, I would also think of like taking away a pattern because of the irregularity of it. But keep in mind, sometimes a pattern or repetition isn't always, or like, let me word this better. Okay, let me think. Sometimes a poet isn't just using like either free verse or no pattern or lack of repetition just to enforce the fact that it doesn't have a pattern. A lot of the time it's deeper than that and suggests another tone or another message specifically. Like with tension and dissonance kind of mimicking that irregular meter, that is kind of conveyed more by that. I don't know if I worded that okay, but yeah, I think we can move on to the next one. Sorry, I didn't get the question. Reading it now. I'll go to the exam line and feel to get the chance to read the characters' thoughts and that character stuff we were talking about at the very beginning, and then also sprinkled throughout, but it was one of the building blocks that we can learn. And 5 out of 5 already answered. Let's reveal that answer. Okay. And 100% right, too. It can create a sense of urgency or continuity that deepens understanding of character emotions. So true. Guys, this like mirrors the last one and proves that you've been paying attention and are more familiar with enjambment now. So go you. And I don't think there's much to say on this one specifically since you got it 100%, other than we can move on to question number 7. In what way does ambiguous fiction contribute to thematic development within a novel? We talked a lot about ambiguity earlier. We talked about fiction, and we talked about theme. Within a novel, it's very prose. Preparing us for tomorrow, maybe? Preparing us for tomorrow. Arnica, hi.
Hi.
We can reveal the answer, Alana. Thank you. Okay, so by allowing themes to emerge gradually through varied interpretations of language. Do you have any thoughts to share, Annika?
Okay, so in what way does ambiguous diction contribute to thematic development? By allowing themes to emerge gradually through varied interpretations. Okay. So we were talking about ambiguity a little earlier, and that basically just creates like a sense of like a sense of you can choose like what you want to get out of what the author is saying. So like basically in the sentence I was telling you earlier about I think it was like the murder and the knife and the student. Let me see if I remember what I was talking about. It was like the you don't know if the murderer was the one who was holding the knife or the student was the one holding the knife. So just like a sense of ambiguity, and you don't really know what's going on. So the other answer that I saw was A. So it says by using precise terminology that leaves no room for misunderstanding thematic elements. That is not ambiguity because ambiguity is like you could have a possible sense of misunderstanding thematic elements if it's not done properly, but usually it just allows for a sense of different interpretations of the same text.
I fully agree. When you think ambiguity in poetry, you should think interpretation or up to interpretation. I realize I'm giving a lot of sets of words today, so it might not be as much of a life hack as I thought. But Arnica hit the nail on the head with that. I don't have much else to say. We can go to the next question. What is one way that meter disruption can contribute to exploring themes within poems featuring open poetic structure? Another structure question. I've got to get on that. I'll make a diagram. I just looked at the chat. I have to remember that secret third one though, because I definitely said it and then forgot it later. But that's okay. We'll see it again. We're waiting on two more. That's four. Two. Okay. So let's look at this, Annika. D, majority got it. Meters to shuffling signal shifts in mood or tones that align with changes in theme. And maintaining strict meter solidify elements.
So you can go, Jasper.
Okay. So the difference here, first thing I see off the bat, meter disruption and then maintaining strict meter. So that's a little bit like opposite. And then disruption is when the meter is, guess what, guys? Disrupted, so that you can show that shift and that shift in tone specifically, which, as it says, changes with the theme. So I think that aligns pretty well with the open structure thing, because not only I kept saying it's more casual if it's open, but it's also more open to different interpretation and shifts in it within itself at that point too. And strict meter doesn't really follow that open structure because it's not really consistent rhythmically or throughout pacing. And I feel like that tone is very different because one is more closed. And I think A more reflects a closed form than an open form.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. A is kind of like the opposite of what meter disruption would be. And meter disruption is basically like so for example, if the poem starts like speeding up in tempo or it starts being like very choppy and very short, that would signal that maybe there is like a more like tense environment. Maybe it's more like it like builds the tension in the story. And if it's more slow and more like if it's more like lengthy and slow, it can cause like a more contemplative tone and a more contemplative mood in the story. So it changes a lot where meter disruption can change the theme a lot. All right, next one.
Open form poem that we were just talking about, with often the effect of an irregular rhyme scheme on character development. And we are ready to review.
So most of you guys did get this right. You said that it reflects the complexity or unpredictability of a character's thoughts and emotion, and that's absolutely right. Like if you guys remember the poem we were reading a little earlier, the Siren song poem, this actually did not have a regular rhyme scheme. It was definitely very irregular because it was more diverse and more open, a more open poem. So this basically showed the complexity of the Siren's thoughts because she was basically the one who was stranded on the island and looking at all these people, and it was showing her thoughts and her complex feelings. On the other end, so people poet will see it shows consistency within a character's actions or dialogue throughout the poem, and that would be the opposite of what it is because that would be a regular rhyme scheme. Anything else you want to add on, Jasper?
No, I think you nailed it. That was a really good connection to Siren song too. That's a thing to keep in mind. Arguments of hyperbole in a poem primarily function to affect the reader's perception. This is our last one for this quiz. And everybody's answered, so we can look. 100%. Finish strong.
So, hyperbole exaggerates aspects of the subject to evoke stronger emotions or response, and that's basically just like a definition question. This can be used in poems to highlight like more emotions or responses from the audience itself. So it can be very useful, and you should note it and you read it in.
And hyperbole is one of the diagram words with exaggeration. So there you go. That's perfect. And the question that we can put on screen. So Jonathan asked, how would you address a poem that you do not understand for essay and FRQ? And I think this is a fantastic question. And it is time for the Q&A. So any other questions you can drop, and Arnika and I and any other of the hosts will answer them. But I think really great question. So what I would try to do is, if you've done everything that you can and you've gone through the building blocks, you've gone through other methods that you traditionally use to understand a poem, and it's just lost on you, I think you can always look for sound and imagery next, because if there's any references to light, if there's any references to a noise, you can, anything that's repeating, like the baby's first literary devices type of poetic devices, I think are the ones that I look for most and the ones that stand out first usually. If you don't understand the tone, then you can at least go for the structure. At the very least, you can at least look for any cutoffs or line breaks or anything like that and shoot for that and try to make a claim related to that. If you have no idea what the speaker's talking about, but you see that there's words spaced all over the place with a bunch of punctuation in like a line, or that reminds me of that, of the poem that you read, Arnica, the pool players one, that one. If say you had no idea what that meant, but you saw the we at the end, you can take unity from that. You see the punctuation at the end of the last line, you can take abruptness and finality in that. And I think that you honestly just have to be willing to not get in your own head and block yourself from understanding it even a little bit. Because there have been times where I've read something and I'm like, I have no idea what I just read. But you just have to go with it and shoot for the stars. And if that's what you have to do, at that point, that's what you have to do. And it might score you at least something. But that's if you're totally lost. Of course, go through the structure that we provided of like looking through the building blocks, looking through figurative language, sound devices, and that kind of stuff first. But if you're totally lost, then I think just like go for what stands out the most to you, if anything does. And it should, it will, believe in yourself. But yeah, Arnica, what do you have to add to this?
Yeah, I think even if you don't really understand what the author is saying, or they use like really complex language, even if it's even if it's not a poem, if it's just like a normal text, you always can find what the author is saying by looking at the structure, as Jasper was saying. I think something really useful for poems is looking at the rhyme scheme, because that can tell you, as Jasper was saying before, it was like the open form or closed form. If it's an open form, that immediately you already know a lot about the author. You can know that they're more like open, that they have like they have more freedom, more complexity in what they're trying to say. If it's a closed form, you know it's more like formal, more rigid in structure. So that can definitely tell you of a lot about the author itself, as long as you look at the fundamental blocks like Jasper was saying. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You did really good explaining that, Jasper. And I think Erica has some really good insights about it too. She's actually an AP Lit teacher herself, so there's nobody better to explain it than her.
True.
There we go. Hey guys, AP Lit teacher here, and resident poet. I do want to add that Jasper, I think you said it best. The idea of just work with anything you can sink your teeth into. Like it really does come down if you have a solid, like even if you don't have a solid idea of what's happening in this poem, grab onto something. Language is a good one, as Jasper pointed out. Rhyme scheme's another good one. If you see a reference, and even if you're the only one that sees that connection, as long as you can explain how that connection to the poem is helping you interpret it, I think you're going to be in safe hands. And a lot of times the prompts will be worded in a way to kind of guide you in a particular direction anyway. So lean back on the wording of the prompt itself, because they're usually trying to strongly hint at a particular interpretation in the prompt. So that's why it's always important to pay attention to that. So I just wanted to chime in with that little bit of tidbit. It looks like we got some more action in the chat. Yeah, just reminders about and you're very welcome, Jonathan. So yeah, you guys are doing great. Are there any things that we didn't go over in as much detail that you guys want to have us review or talk about further? Jasper and Arnica are here to cover those things, because I know we threw a lot of information at you in the past almost 3 hours. So if there's something that's still like lingering and you're like, why didn't they talk about that for poetry? toss it in the chat, and I'm gonna go away now.
Thank you for your input, Erica. And we can answer any burning questions. And if need be, we can summon Erica from the wing again. And of course, for any non-poetry related questions, you can tune in tomorrow night or the next night or the next night or get this, the next night, because we will be here for the exam. Oh, here it is. Thank you, Alana. Prose, literary argument, MCQ tips, and finale. So remember that
Also,
schedule.
If not, oops.
You're good. You're good. Keep talking.
Okay, if you guys have not seen our polls, please complete it. We have really fun ones. I think we have one that says it's like a quote, and then you just say if it's by Shakespeare or Taylor Swift. So I think you guys should do it.
That's true. Our poll creator put a lot of time into that, and I thought it was very clever and very relevant. Taylor Timothy Shakespeare would be proud. Shakespeare versus Taylor reveal in 5 minutes. Building up the suspense, Alana. Right, they are tricky. I was thinking that, and I was looking at them earlier when I was going through them. Which FRQ topic are you guys? I don't know. That's a hard question. I feel like I want to say the poetry one's my favorite. I've been like Arnek and I have been like this for poetry preview and night one. So I feel like that's the one I feel most comfortable in after preparing for these slides and these nights.
Mm-hmm.
But I honestly I don't know for sure.
I can tell you the one I don't like the most, and that is the one where you basically have to like pull stuff in your head, which is the like longer one. That one is a little tricky, but our tips from our cram sessions, I think you guys will eat that up. Oh yeah, I know. Either people really love it or they really hate it. There's like no in between.
Yeah, Arneka, I'm in the same boat as you. I do not like the novel one. I was writing, or the one. Why do I not know what it's called? I think I've just been talking too much. But I had to write a mock one on a doll's house, and I forgot Nora's name, so I just kept calling her the protagonist the whole time. I was like, this feels like I feel like her husband. I'm just calling her the wife right now. And I felt so mean because that's like all she's reduced to, and I was reducing her to it. Like
the irony there, Jasper. The irony.
I know. I felt so bad, but I could remember Christine's name, but I could.
I will chime in that any of you watching this, if you do blank on a name, it's okay. You can call her the protagonist. It's fine. It's a stressful time. We all blank on names and titles all the time.
It was the same day that I forgot the word indestructible, so I think I was just having a moment. I probably should have gone to bed a little bit earlier, but
I did want to answer Michelle's question. I also think I prefer the poetry prompt because I feel like poetry is just, there's so much more you can talk about. I don't know. Maybe it's because I write poetry. I'm like, this is my comfort zone. Novel, I'm just like, I don't know. It just really depends on the subject too. But we'll talk more about all of them in the next couple of nights. So have no fear.
The novel one, I will be tuning in.
I will be tuning in too. We've literally only read 2 stories. We've read Macbeth and we've read The Importance of Being Earnest. I love both of them, and they're very different from each other. But that's like my only knowledge. Like that's the only thing I'm using on the exam. Lord of Flies is also good.
Mm.
I read that like a while ago, a long while ago.
Mm.
The importance
The importance of being.
It's so. Also, the movie was actually really good. It was like to the book.
Okay, so I know we're just still doing Q&A, so chat, chime in before we do our Taylor Shakespeare reveal, unless we did that already and I just wasn't paying attention. But are you more confident in poetry multiple choice, or are you more confident in poetry essay? Which one are you feeling stronger about right now?
Good question. Good question, Erica. We can figure out how to get you.
There is poetry multiple choice and there is poetry essay. So which are we feeling more confident about? Sound off in the chat.
Me personally, I'm going to say poetry essay. If I have to pick someone else's words, I automatically feel a lot worse about it for an answer.
Right?
Yeah. If I can yap, I mean, you know me. I just ran my mouth for how long? If I can yap about it, then I'm golden. But right now, like,
you can convince us of anything, but multiple choice, it's like that's their interpretation. I don't know.
Exactly. It's not my business at that point. I don't know what I'm putting. I'm kidding. But like still.
Like I feel like it's very subjective.
Alana says drum roll. Here we go.
Alana's ready. Alana's ready. We are reviewing them.
Let's see.
Drums. Last votes.
Last votes, guys.
Oh, what do we think? Oh no.
Oh.
I'm gonna say Taylor.
I feel like yeah, that seems like Taylor Swift, the first one. The how can it be said I am alone when all the world is here to look on me. I'm pretty sure that's Swift.
I think so too. I'm tempted to disagree just to disagree, but I think I'm gonna go with you guys. I might conform. I might have to.
Let us know, Alana.
Alana, tell us. It's killing me. Okay, drum again. What?
Shakespeare?
Shakespeare? Oh my goodness.
Oh my god. I'm blindsided.
Guys, I'm gonna have to turn in my AP Lit card, I think. I don't know.
I shouldn't have conformed, guys.
Conformity is so bad. It's always bad.
All this
is so dystopian now.
All this tells me like what Swift and Shakespeare would have been best friends. That's all this tells me. That's all this tells me.
The other one is Taylor. Oh, okay. Ooh. I had a feeling it would be 1 and 1. Or yeah.
Interesting. I feel like I recognize this lyric. I don't know what song it's from though.
Yeah.
All right, so don't forget to fill out that survey. We're reaching the end of our little cram session here. I'll let Jasper and Arnica send you off. I don't want to hear a teacher after having your teachers talk to you on Friday, so I'm going to go back and disappear now.
Oh, but yeah.
Oh, I didn't disappear. I sent the other.
You can stay.
It's fine. I'm trying to figure. It's been too late, guys. It's too late now.
I'm tired.
That's the end of our session. Follow us on Fiveable on social.
Yeah, follow us and come back tomorrow.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and please take our survey if you didn't already.
Take our survey.
Bye.
We want to
have a great night, guys. Bye.
Good night.